to ask our staff to broadcast today's dars also on our Facebook page. So inshallah, for those of you that are watching online, assalamu alaikum to you also. I wanted to kind of give you a primer on what the intent of this series is. iMRAAN started last Ramadan, and we're going, and I don't think we're going to be done until probably next Ramadan at the pace that we're going. Today's dars should last between 45 minutes to an hour, and that's just on ayah number 77. So, and I'm not in a hurry. There are 200 ayat in the surah, and I'm not in a hurry. So we're probably going to take our time. It's not like we do one ayah every dars. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 ayat, but depending on the subject matter in the ayah. One of the things that I try to do as we study the surah is when we get through a certain unit of subject matter, I keep going ayah by ayah. Then I'm going to take you back, sort of help you understand the flow of the ayat, how ayat were coming together organizationally, how the subject matter was transitioning from one to the other. Because when you study one ayah in depth, it's easy to lose sight of where this was coming from and where this was headed. Because when you're standing in prayer and reciting Quran, all the ayat are in flow. There's no stopping and pondering. So it's a continuous conversation. So think of it this way: when you think about someone talking and they're saying 5, 6, 7 sentences in a row, the way your brain processes that, the way you analyze that is different. But if you heard one single quote, just one quote, and you thought about that, the way your brain processes that is completely different. What comes to your mind when you think of that one sentence is isolated, and there's an opportunity for you to contemplate on every word or just that idea in isolation from other ideas that came before or ideas that are coming after, right? So both of them have an advantage. So in this series, what I try to do, because this is part of the series of a deeper look, we go into an ayah, we try to dig as much as we can, try to find as many benefits and counsel and wisdom from Allah Azza wa Jalla as we can, dig from the works of our remarkable scholarship and our history from what we can. And that's at the level of one ayah. But when we get through enough ayat that are dealing with similar subject matter, forming a passage or a sub-passage, then let's go back and look at it as a conversation. And again, our brain is going to process that a little bit differently. And so both of those are important dimensions of the study of the Quran, the flow of the Quran, and an ayah by ayah study also. In any case, today's subject matter, once again, continuing with the kinds of criticisms Allah makes of the knowledgeable of the people. Let's translate this ayah first. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَشْتَرُونَ بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ وَأَيْمَانِهِمْ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. This would be the subject of the sentence, the opening of the sentence. It's not a sentence by itself, it's just the opening. And that is no doubt those who trade away or sell off the promise of Allah. Allah's promise. We'll dig into that phrase a little bit later. So Allah's promise and their oaths. So there's two things they sell off. They sell off Allah's promise and they sell their oaths, okay, for a small price. ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا, they give that away and gain only a small price, a small gain. أُولَٰئِكَ, those people, now these are the people that are going to be talked about. Then Allah pauses and says, أُولَٰئِكَ, this is مُبْتَدَأ ثَانِي, another introduction. Those people, لَا خَلَاقَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. Notice now there's going to be a number of things. Number one, لَا خَلَاقَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. Those people, they have absolutely no portion reserved for them whatsoever in any way, shape, or form in the afterlife. They have nothing to gain in the afterlife whatsoever. لَا خَلَاقَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. That's the first criticism. Second criticism, وَلَا يُكَلِّمُهُمُ اللَّهُ. And Allah will not be speaking with them. So the first one, they have nothing in the afterlife, no reservation of any kind, of the least creation in the afterlife. They get nothing. And then the second, Allah won't be speaking with them. وَلَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهِمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. And He will not be looking towards them on the day of resurrection. That's the third scathing criticism. They get nothing in the akhirah. Allah doesn't speak to them. Allah doesn't look towards them on the day of resurrection. Nazara can have an implicit, that's the explicit meaning, to look at someone. It can also implicitly imply or suggest to give someone time, to give someone a little bit of an opportunity. And that's nazara, which is why the word nazara also gives us the meaning of intidhar, which means to wait for someone. And the devil said to Allah Azza wa Jal, "Anzirni ila yawmi yub'athun." Give me time until the day they're resurrected. So wait, don't punish me yet, give me time. That's the same word, anzirni, from the same origin, the if'al version. Anyway, so the third item is that He won't be looking towards them or giving them any time implicitly. وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ, nor will He purify them. And I'll dig into that a little bit later. So this is now 4 items. لا خلاق لهم في الآخرة, nothing for them in the afterlife. He won't speak with them. He won't look towards them on the day of resurrection. He won't purify them. There's 4 things already. And on top of all of that, وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, and they have painful punishment. So there are 5 elements of Allah's anger in this ayah over this group of people. Now that's not common. Commonly you find these people have painful punishment, or these people will get nothing in the akhirah, or they are among the losers. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ, they're the losers, or they're the ones that are, they're the ones that are going to receive punishment, or they're the ones that have been cursed, etc., etc. You might find 1, maybe 2 scathing criticisms or 2 bad outcomes for a group of people. But here Allah goes out of His way, and this happens not only here, it happens only on rare occasions in the Quran. Some crimes are so offensive to Allah that when He speaks about the consequences of those crimes, He goes one, then another, then another, then another, then another. This is 5 of them. 5 of them. So even from the rhetorical point of view, the group of people that's being talked about have deserved and like some special level of anger from Allah. And we've been reading criticisms of the people of the book of all kinds, but this seems to be some special kind of crime that Allah Azza wa Jalla finds particularly offensive, that He speaks in this way about this crime. Okay, so what we're going to try to do now, let's go back again. They sell off the promise of Allah and their oaths. That's what we read. They sell off the promise of Allah and their oaths. So let's dig into that a little bit. The first obvious thing I want you to know is promise of Allah. There's an idafa, there's an of relationship between these 2 words. And what is that phrase, which occurs many places in the Quran? Let's start with the basics. Promise of Allah means a promise Allah demanded that you make. A promise Allah took from you, like your father takes a promise from you. You're never going to do that again. Your mom takes a promise from you. Your wife takes a promise from you, etc., etc. Those kinds of, when someone takes a promise, that becomes their promise. In other words, the one who demanded that you make a promise. That's the promise of Allah. That's basic implication, right? But when they say their oaths, it's not the oaths of Allah or the commitment of the people, their oaths. In other words, I say, promise you'll do this, and you respond, I swear I will. Right? So there's a converse, right? The one who's demanding the promise says, promise me. And the one who responds doesn't just say, I promise, he says, I swear I'm going to uphold it. So that's the kind of this conversation between Allah and the people. And so Allah says, those who Allah took a promise from, and they took an oath that they're going to uphold that promise. Those people. And then when they made that promise, they sold it off. Even after knowing what promise Allah made from them, took from them, and the commitment they openly declared themselves. Despite that, despite taking their oath, they still went back on it and sold it off like it was nothing for some small gain. Those people, particular anger of Allah. That's one easy read of the meanings of this ayah. But let's go a little bit deeper. Imam Alusi rahimahullah, he wanted to dig into what could imply the promise of Allah. What could it mean in the study of the Quran? Because this phrase is used in so many places. So culminating and kind of doing a survey of all of them, what does the promise of Allah suggest from the Quran? So the first is everything that Allah has commanded, meaning His revelations. That's the promise of Allah. Allah has given us certain demands, and those who believe in Him, anybody who says La ilaha illallah, has that statement itself is a promise. When we say Iyaka na'budu in the Fatiha, we have made a promise. We promise that we're enslaving ourselves to you. So there's a ahad in just accepting that Allah is God, that Allah is the one to be worshipped and obeyed, that Allah is the ultimate authority, that you're a slave. Just like, for example, if you say, I accept this employment, I accept this job, then it doesn't have to be said that you're promising that you'll show up on time, or you're going to do this task. When you accept a role, then it comes with a promise. The same way when you sign paperwork and the state issues you a driver's license, you've already promised that you're stopping at a red light. You've promised that you're not going to speed. You've promised you're not going to drive the wrong way on the other side of the road. You've made that promise already because you entered into a role. You understand? So the revelation of Allah, once you accept it, once you believe the Quran and the teachings given to the Prophet ﷺ to be revelation, then accepting that in and of itself is actually making a promise to Allah. Now that's really important to understand, because for a lot of people, in their minds they have, and you might be one of them, that you have, well, I believe it, but that doesn't mean that I totally follow it, or, well, believing something, you wouldn't say that for traffic rules. Like, I believe in red lights being something you should stop at, but I don't totally follow it. I mean, it's the weekend. So you don't do that because you believe in something, you've accepted its authority, and that actually means you abide by it. But when it comes to Allah's promise, we actually don't, we separate those two. I believe it, but I'm not so sure about following it. Like that's, I try, you know, but, and when people say I try, what that often suggests is I don't feel like it. I really don't feel like it. And there's one thing that, you know, all of us are struggling. Nobody's perfect. We're all trying to obey Allah as best we can. And this is not a criticism of those who don't obey Allah perfectly, because nobody does that. Nobody obeys Allah perfectly. But when you tell yourself that you're going to compromise what Allah asks in your head, when you tell yourself you're trying, but you actually aren't even trying. You're not even trying, but you tell yourself that, then that's a lie with Allah. That's a lie to Allah. So that's a scary part of this statement that we need to be aware of. So that's the first thing Imam Alusi says, the promise made to Allah by way of revelation, or accepting His revelation as demands that He's made from us. The second, of course, is in the context, the covenant He took from the Jews, the Jewish people. He took a promise from them that when another prophet comes, you will accept that prophet and the revelation that he brings. And so Allah kept sending them prophet after prophet after prophet. That was the promise of Allah to them. And they kept accepting new prophets, yet still hurting those prophets, ridiculing those prophets, giving them a hard time. Even their greatest prophet, Musa alayhi salam, had to say, "Lima tu'dhunani, why are you causing me pain?" And then in the course of this surah, the prophet promised to them after Musa, the great prophet promised after Musa alayhi salam, the next from the ulul azm min ar-rusul is Isa alayhi salam. Jesus comes and they reject him altogether. And then finally, that same promise of accepting messengers is culminated in the coming of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They've made a promise, when a prophet comes and shows you revelation, you'll accept it. That was the promise to the Israelites. They're breaking that, and they've taken an oath to uphold that. So it's again a direct criticism of the people of the book that have shown a track record of not abiding by the promise they made to God in regards to accepting messengers, and in regards to the coming of the next installation of revelation. And then Imam Alusi actually goes further to say that Allah endowed, now think about this carefully. So far we've got, you know, revelation and the coming of prophets are the promises of Allah. But there's a third that has nothing to do with revelation, nothing to do with the promise of Allah. Allah gave human beings a profound ability to distinguish right from wrong, a conscience. And this is not something He gave only to Muslims, He gave it to human beings. It's called the fitrah. It's called an-nafsul lawwama in the Quran, the self that blames itself. You don't have to be raised a Muslim or be raised in a, you know, in a religious society to know that lying is wrong, or hurting somebody is a bad thing, or stealing is wrong. This is a part of our conscience, our programming, that animals don't have, other species don't have. They don't have this thing called guilt. They don't have this thing called a conscience and like an ability to distinguish right and wrong. This was something spiritually programmed onto our operating system by Allah. And that when that programming was happening, it's actually talked about in Surah Al-A'raf. One day, inshallah, far from now, we're going to get to Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th surah. And in the 172nd ayah of that surah, Allah actually describes when He created all of us all together. We were all made at the same time. Our souls were created all at the same time. This huge gathering of all of us. Because, you know, my mom's older than I am. My children are younger than I am. But the ruh inside of us, the soul inside of us, is actually the same age. That's the same age. And it's in Allah's, this giant, you can consider it a giant storage warehouse, that it sits there. And then when any mother becomes pregnant, then after a certain number of days, the angel is commanded to take one of those that are sitting up there and bring them down into the mom. That's how life works, right? But all of us were in this original gathering when Allah made us. And we were actually directly in the company of Allah. That's the Islamic creed. We were directly in the company of Allah, and Allah spoke to all of us. I've already actually directly had a conversation with Allah, directly, and so have you. And that a part of that conversation is actually mentioned in Surah Al-A'raf. It's fascinating. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. When your master took from the children of Adam, from their backs, their offspring, all the offsprings were laid out, وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, and He made them take testimony against their own selves. He made them testify. So all of us are there in front of Allah, like we will be on Judgment Day. This is before Judgment Day, before we even came on this earth. And He made us all take an oath, take a testimony. Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your master? Am I not your master? He spoke to us, and we responded, Qalu bala, of course. Why wouldn't you be? Shahidna, we bear witness, we testify. An taqulu yawm al-qiyamati inna kunna an hadha ghafilin. And I've made you take this oath Because otherwise you might end up saying on Judgment Day that we had no idea about this promise. We had no idea that you made us testify. Yeah, you did. It's in your conscience. That's the part of our conscience. That's that thing inside of us is actually what makes us inclined towards good behavior. It's the part of us, even if you learn nothing about religion from any religion, it's the part of you that feels bad when you do something wrong or when you see someone being merciless. Because you were in the company of Allah and Allah is the most merciful, you're inclined towards mercy. Allah is forgiving, you're inclined towards forgiveness. Allah is just, you're naturally inclined towards justice. Allah is beautiful. Inna Allaha jamilun yuhibbul jamal. Human beings are inclined towards beauty. You don't see ants and birds and trees beautifying their house. You don't see cows and goats beautifying their food. What do? We beautify everything. We want to beautify the plate. We want to beautify the clothing. We want to beautify our homes. Just this love of beauty that we have is actually something endowed by Allah Himself because we were in His company. This is why other creatures don't have it the way we have it. They don't feel this inclination the way we do. You know, the people who argue in the evolutionary process, where in evolution did the quest for beauty come from? Evolutionary processes should actually incline us entirely and only towards things that are necessary for our survival. So long as you have the nutrition you need and the shelter you need, we're human beings should just be better at making shelter than others because we're more evolved. Better at preparing our food because we're more evolved. Fine. But why is it that an architect builds a house and says, I can build a better one? Or a designer or a painter makes a painting and says, I want to make another one. More beautiful and more beautiful and more beautiful. Where did this quest for beauty come from? That came from Allah Azza wa Jal. In any case, coming back to this, because we were in the company of Allah and that conscience was given to all human beings, Allah is actually saying, those who sell off their own conscience and the oath they had originally taken with Allah. They had already, that conversation that I just referred to in Araf, they've already engaged in that conversation. And yet they sell that off. Like they don't have a conscience. Like they don't even feel bad. Those kinds of people. So Allah is now, the implications of these are pretty powerful. أُولَٰئِكَ لَا خَلَاقَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. I've already mentioned to you what are the implications of that. Now when the companions heard this, is really interesting now, this next phase of our discussion. Amal Alusi rahimahullah mentions that there are several different narrations, historical accounts of what occasion did this ayah come in. There are different reports of when this verse came, this ayah came, and what it's talking about. So I'm going to read through some of that and we'll look at Ibn Ashur's analysis of all these multiple accounts. Because if it's one ayah, it can only come on one occasion, but the Sahaba are telling us there are multiple occasions. Right? There's like 5 or 6 occasions, and all of them are saying it came about that, it came about that, it came about that. So how do you reconcile all of that? But let's look at some of these occasions that have been recorded. أخرج الستة وغيرهم عن ابن مسعود رضي الله تعالى عنه قال. It's recorded in all 6 of the Sahih books, narrated by Ibn Mas'ud. من حلف على, this is a tribute to قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم says, من حلف على يمين فهو فاجر ليقطع بها مال امرئ مسلم. Whoever takes an oath by Allah, whoever takes and swear by Allah, or he ever takes an oath, actually I swear I'm telling the truth, or claims that they're telling the truth and makes a claim, and they do this and they are engaged in a crime. Hello, I'm in a verse right now. Okay, so they're engaged in a crime, they're doing this sinfully. لِيَقْطَعَ بِهَا مَالَ امْرِئٍ مُسْلِمٍ. Listen to this carefully. They do this so they can take and steal away, cut off the money from another Muslim. Okay, so whoever takes an oath or makes a claim, so they can basically rob another Muslim. But the wording of this hadith is interesting. It's not that they can steal that money. It can also mean if they take an oath to cause another Muslim damage. Like, I'll give you a silly example. Somebody's running a restaurant, you're running a restaurant, you make a false claim that one has cockroaches in his food or something. And their restaurant goes down because you made that claim. And the money that was coming their way got cut off. When you take an oath to cause someone financial damage, or you meant to divert risk from them, or to steal their money, when you make a claim like that, in any situation, لَقِيَ اللَّهَ وَهُوَ عَلَيْهِ غَضْبَانٌ. He gets to meet Allah. This person gets to meet with Allah. And Allah is angry against him extremely. And in the other, in فَقَالَ الْأَشْعَث bin Qais, Ash'ath bin Qais says, فِيَّا. This story, this ayah, about those who sell off their promise to Allah and their oath is actually referring to people that make cheating promises, that make claims that are wrong, and then say they swear by it. And they try to go off their credibility. Yameen doesn't mean I swear, I take an oath. That's not all it means. It means when someone is claiming that they're offering you credible information, or they're using their credibility to stake a claim, and they know that it's wrong, and they're falsifying, exaggerating to harm somebody else. This is actually part of this yameen fajr. Okay, anyway. Fiya. Wallahi kana dhalika kana bayni wa bayna rajulin min al-yahudi. This is actually, I swear to God, this is about me. This is a companion named Ash'ath ibn Qais. He says that he and a man from the Jewish tribes had a land between us. We had a land between. فَجَحَدَنِي. So in other words, they had shared land and he wants more of the property. فَجَحَدَنِي. He starts arguing with me. He takes some of my land, starts usurping it. فَقَدِمْتُهُ إِلَى النَّبِي أَوْ قَدَمْتُهُ إِلَى النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So I came to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and brought him with me to present this case. Like, we have a land dispute, please solve it for us. فَقَالَ لِي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم أَلَكَ بَيِّنَةٌ. And so the Prophet ﷺ asked me, do you have any proof that this patch of land is yours? Like, I mean, obviously it's a court, you have to provide evidence. So the Prophet ﷺ asked him, do you have clear proof? قُلْتْ لَا. He said, no, I don't have any evidence. فَقَالَ لِلْيَهُودِي أُحْلُفْ. So the Prophet ﷺ asked him, swear, take an oath that your claim is true. So he's asking the Jewish man to take an oath that his claim is true. فَقُلْتْ. So I said to the messenger, Ya Rasulullah, إِذَنْ يَحْلِفَ فَيَذْهَبُ مَالِي. He says, Ya Rasulullah, he's just going to say, I swear to God it's mine, and he's going to walk away with my money? Just because he made that claim? فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. Then Allah revealed this. In other words, when people make false testimony, when people make false claims, then they might get little something here. They might shortchange somebody, they might have somebody lose a court case, they might cause somebody a damage to their business, their reputation, whatever it may be. But that's a small gain that they made. But what are the consequences? لا خلاق لهم في الآخرة لا يكلمه الله لا ينظر إليهم ولا يزكيهم ولهم عذاب أليم. Ya Allah. 5. Because of that. So the Prophet ﷺ is essentially arguing, what did you gain and what did you lose? What are you going to gain and what are you going to lose? وغيره عن عبد الله بن أبي أوفى. Other people said this is Abdullah ibn Away. أوفى أن رجلا أقام سلعة له في السوق فحلف بالله لقد أعطى بها ما لم يعطه. So look at this example. So others said that this is about a marketplace and somebody's selling items. This guy brings his materials, whatever, he brings leather, let's say, right? And he says, I paid this price for this leather. And he basically comes and says, look, I can't sell it to you for 100 because I paid 99 myself. At least let me make $1. It was so expensive for me. And so he makes a claim about what it cost him so he can charge his customer. لِيُوقِعَ فِيهَا رَجُلًا مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. So he can con somebody from among the Muslims in the marketplace. Right? So if somebody's exaggerating their costs or making claims about the quality of a product, oh, this is amazing, this is the best ever. You know, in sales, a lot of times it becomes a test of how well you can lie, how convincingly you can lie. How well can you sell a lemon to somebody, you know? And to make claims about cost, and you know, I remember when my mom used to make me do stuff like go to, those of you who don't speak Urdu won't know what I'm talking about. My mom and I went to tan places a lot. My mom sewed clothes, so we go to these places, we've got rolls and rolls of cloth. And that's like this is a place for a child to just sit and contemplate the meaning of life, because there's nothing to do. And these places in like Pakistan, Saudi, other places, every one of these places, you'll know one thing standard. They always have a stool. And they have the stool because the guy, the husband, the son, whoever brought the mom or the wife, they're gonna die of boredom. And they're not gonna just stand there looking at cloth. So they say, you sit here, the fan is facing you, you chill while I make money off of the missus. That's the formula, right? Anyway, so these guys, when they sell, of course, haggling is like a thing, right? So it's in the Muslim world, haggling is a thing. And when you say, okay, this is 50, and my mom goes, I'll give you 5. And I look at my mom like, he asked for 50, you can ask for 5? And he goes, no, Baji, nahi, Baji, I have small children, I will die, and I haven't fed them in 3 days, and It's okay, I'll give you 45. My mom goes, oh, okay, 5. And then like 30 minutes later, he sells it for 7. And he's crying like, boy, you robbed me today, and you really... Nobody robbed nobody. He was just trying to make a huge margin, talking about his costs and his children and, you know, the cow he hasn't fed or whatever else. And all of that to convince the seller that his life is miserable. And if he's doing that truthfully, that's something else. But if he's doing that dishonestly, then that's actually also the promise. Notice the ayah was promise made with Allah and their oaths. The promise made with Allah, revelation. But your oaths are all of your oaths, all of your claims, all of your promises, in any circumstance, in business, in family, in whatever. When you make a commitment and you make these claims, that falls under this ayah, according to the Sahaba. فَنَزَلَتْ هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ, then this ayah came down. نَزَلَتْ هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ فِي أبي رافع ولبابة بن أبي الحقيق وكعب بن الأشرف وحيي بن أخطب حرفوا التوراة. And then others say that this ayah came about this group of people who changed the Torah. وَبَدَّلُوا نَعْتَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. And they changed the description of the Prophet in the Torah. Because the Prophet was, the description was matching way too much, so they had to actually go change it. وَحُكْمَ الْأَمَانَاتِ. And they actually changed the verdict on how you have to give the rights back, meaning they changed the law that was given by God in the Old Testament to, well, or in the Talmud even, to when you con a non-believer, when you con a Gentile, a non-Jew, then it's okay. But otherwise it's not. A fellow believer, no, you can't do that. And actually, I'm not even making this a scathing criticism of Jews. I've seen Muslims do this. I've seen Muslims say, well, that's a kafir, so it's okay. You know, Darul Harb. The only harb you have is with the truth. You know, you know, this, what side of that harb are you on? Because that sounds like Hizb Shaitan to me, you know. Because that you would think that, oh, between Muslims we should be honest, and between non-Muslims it's okay, whatever. Lie, cheat, make whatever claims. And so, you know, even things like lying on your taxes. Oh, the government is kafir, I'm not giving them taxes. Why are you living here? You use the government's roads. You use the government's, you know, security. You call the government's police when something's wrong. You use the government's fire department when they come and put a fire out in your house. What happened with, no, but they're kuffar. Oh yeah? Just when it comes to giving you benefits, they're not kuffar, but when it comes to you fulfilling your part of the responsibility, then all of a sudden they're kuffar. It's a pretty good discount program you got going there. You know, this sickness is theirs, used to be theirs, it's ours now. You know? And so وَحُكْمَ الْأَمَانَاتِ وَغَيْرَهُمْ, and other things just like these, وَأَخَذُوا عَلَى ذَلِكَ رَشْوَةً, and they used to take bribes. Bribes is part of this. Accepting bribes is part of this. You know, some places in the Muslim world, when you go and you want to get a visa and you hand your passport, what do they say? It's light. Like, passports have weight? What do you mean it's light? You have to stick cash in there and then they're going to stamp it. In one Muslim country, we got pulled over and we had some food supplies in the trunk for an orphanage. So this is food supplies. Cops pull us over in the Muslim country, that shall not be named. Where are you going? We're going here. What you have in the trunk? Food. Cop goes, I'm hungry. And we're like, that's for orphans. Yeah, that's okay. Maybe I'm orphan. Like, no, you're not orphan. No, it's okay, you give me some, I let you go. No, we're not going to do that. And we're standing there half an hour haggling with this guy because we're not going to give up a can of food to you, bro. That will be a bribe. That's not going to happen. But this is the scenario. This is part of imanihim. Your job was to protect and serve. Your job was to make sure crimes don't happen, not use your authority to commit crimes. That's what you do with this place. And of course, this doesn't just happen in the Muslim world. It happens here. Corrupt police officers, corrupt government officials, you know, corrupt business practices. And so, وَرُوِيَ غَيْرُ ذَلِكَ وَلَا مَانِعْ مِنْ تَعَدُّدِ سَبَبِ النُّزُولِ كَمَا حَقَّقُوهُ. And Imam Alusi says, and there are other narrations, all of them saying that this ayah is about them. But what do you notice are the common thread? Dishonesty, right? Dishonesty is the common thread. And so, commenting on that, Ibn Ashur rahimahullah says, مَنْ شَابَهَهُمْ بِهَذِهِ الصَّفَاتِ فَهُوَ لَاحِقٌ بِهِمْ. Ibn Ashur says something so heavy. Man, he just dropped it. He goes, whoever resembles these qualities is associated with the people mentioned in this ayah. Is one and the same. So passages about the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, the corrupt among them, and he says, no, if these qualities are found in anybody, then they are part of this ayah. It's not just about them. حتى ظن بعض السلف أن هذه الآية نزلت في من حلف يمينا باطلة. As a matter of fact, this is why the early generations believed that this ayah came down about someone who took a false testimony, made a false claim. وكل يظن أنها نزلت فيما يعرفه من قصة يمين فاجرة. And every one of them believes that this has to do with an incident of dishonesty. Now let me explain this to you, this concept. This is important. When you find multiple narrations saying this ayah came at this occasion, this ayah came at this occasion, the way you have to think about that is as follows. The Prophet ﷺ taught the Quran. He didn't teach it to one person, he taught it to the entire community. When an ayah came down, it was like a broadcast. Everybody knows it. A lot of people are reciting it. When they are at a certain situation, when somebody's cheating somebody else, the companion in presence recites the ayah that applies to that situation. You understand? And when they do that, the audience that's there, like, this ayah is about that situation. That doesn't mean the ayah came right now. It actually means the ayah is applicable to this circumstance. In a day later, 2 days later, or at the same time somewhere else, someone else is engaged in some dishonest practice. And there are some other companions in presence. And when they see this happening, they cite this ayah as if this ayah is about this. So nazala fi in the Arabic language came down in. The preposition in can mean at the occasion of, but it can also mean having to do with. This ayah has to do with cases like these. So we don't reduce sabab al-nuzul as this ayah came exactly at this time. No, it can also mean this ayah applies to a circumstance like this one. So the Sahaba thought, this circumstance, it applies. This circumstance, it also applies. This circumstance, it also applies. So they're giving you case studies of how this would apply. This changes your view of how the Quran is to be understood, or even how historical context is to be understood. Historical context is to be understood that these ayat are case studies, or these events are case studies for how the ayat apply, or how that first generation that learned the Quran thought about applying the Quran. Like, that's how they used to think. This is the theory, this is the application, right? That's why sabab al-nuzul is important. Now, Ibn Ashur goes on to mention al-a'wab al-nazira aw al-rasha. He says these are, when people try to take compensation that is small gains, make some petty, gain, or cause somebody harm that they are so petty that they get a kick out of getting somebody in harm's way, or if they accept bribes, corrupt kinds of gains. وَوَصَفَ ذَلِكَ بِالْقِلَّةِ. And you know what Allah said? Those who sell the promise of Allah and their oaths for a small price. The phrase is small or minimal price. قِلَّةِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. A minimal price. Now, Ibn Ashur says, why did he say minimal? What do you mean minimal price? Maybe somebody made a lot of money from it. So what does he mean by minimal price? He says, وَوَصَفَ ذَلِكَ بِالْقِلَّةِ لِقِلَّتِهِ فِي جَنْبِ مَا يَفُوتُهُمْ مِنَ الثَّوَابِ وَيَحْصُلُ لَهُمْ مِنَ الْعِقَابِ. He says, Allah mentioned this is very little, because compared to what they lost from the reward of Allah for just being honest. Like if somebody offered you $10 and they said, $10 and give me this truck. And the truck is full of gold. And you're like, $10. You lost this gold. You lost this gold. Also understand the converse of this ayah is true. What does that mean? Those who don't shortchange, those who stay honest even if it's becoming difficult, those who don't accept bribes, those who'd rather stay hungry, those who'd rather not make as much money as everybody else. All their colleagues are accepting bribes, all their colleagues are engaged in corruption, and they're making money on top of money on top of money, building nicer homes, getting nicer cars, and you're still in a cruddy apartment, your kids can't go to private school, you're missing out on everything else because you refuse to take a bribe, or you refuse to make corrupt testimony. When you act like that, and your family might make you feel like, why are we missing out? Why can't you be like everyone else? Everybody does it. What's the big deal? When you can hold back, then number one, you have a reserved portion in the akhirah, because the opposite of أُولَٰئِكَ لَا خَلَاقَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ خَلَاقٌ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. And Allah said that He won't speak to them. Guess what? These are the people Allah will speak to. And He said about them, Allah won't look at them. So these are the people Allah will look at. And He said about them, these are not the people Allah will purify, these are the people Allah will purify. So everything that's the opposite is going to happen to those who can hold on to their dignity, hold on to honest practices and not go for a small gain. That gain is very tempting in the short run, but the cost of it is way too high. And what they gain as far as punishment is concerned, what did you gain? You know, when people commit petty crimes sometimes, they commit a small crime, they made $100 and ended up 5 years in jail. Was that $100 worth it? What this gain for that loss? That's a loss. That's not a gain at all. And so that's the comparison Allah is making by saying, you know, ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. Now, ulaika, just a little bit about the word ulaika. Those people. You see that grammatically the sentence is those who sell the promise of Allah and the oaths they've made for a small price have no portion in the afterlife. That's a simple sentence. But those who did this, comma, those people, ulaika la khalaqa lahum fil akhirah, as though, this is called mubtada thani, as though the sentence started over again. The idea of starting a sentence over again is an indication of exclusivity. It could mean these people like nobody else. These above and beyond all else that might be worthy of punishment, this is a special category of criminal. I already told you there are 5 consequences mentioned. Above and beyond that, even before we get to the consequences, Allah is actually doing what's called al-ithbatu ala ghayr al-mubtada. In other words, Allah is establishing these and these alone, these like nobody else. And when somebody talks like that, not only is it about creating a kind of exclusivity, it's also an expression of one's anger. Those people are messed up. When I said those people twice, that's an indication of my anger. Right? Written speech doesn't do that, but conversation, you can repeat yourself. You know, like when they said it to Ibrahim alayhi salam, "Anta fa'alta hadha?" You did this? They didn't just say, "Did you do it?" "Afa'alta hadha." It's "Anta fa'alta hadha." Did you do this? And so when that "you" is repeated, it's an expression of one's anger. And so here, Allah's anger is already there before we get to what's going to happen with them. Like by the time you get to ulaik, anybody who's familiar with the language should already be scared. Because Allah added that word ulaika. Ulaika, interestingly, also is ishara lil bu'd. It's actually ishara lil ba'id. It's a distant pronoun. You know how in English you say these, which is close, and those is far? Ulaika is far, which is already indicating a kind of distance between them and Allah. Like people that are far off. And so now let's talk about these 5 consequences. La khalaqa lahum fil akhirah, the first one. There's absolutely no portion for them in the afterlife. Now the word khalaq, you might have heard the word khalq, creation. Allah is badi', you know, He's mubdi, He's also khaliq, He's also fatir. All of these words are translated as creator. But they all have sort of slightly different implications. I want to give you something about the origin of the word khalq, what it comes from, and how that plays a role in this idea of portion. Because even the word for portion, Quran has nasib, Quran has jaza, you know, Quran has qism. They have different word for portion. So this particular word that's being used here has a certain flavor. Al-khaliqa al-nuqra fi al-jabal yastanqi'u fiha al-ma' wal-bi'ru sa'ata tuhfar. What I want you to know is some visual imagery. Instead of translating this, imagine a mountain or a rock. And you know how rocks don't have a smooth surface? They're like cracks or jagged rock. And there's a little dip in the rock. Like one of the surfaces has a little bit of a crevice, like almost like a mini cup. And when it rains, water can, like a drop of it, it's enough to hold a drop of water on it, right? That's actually called a khaliqa. That little dip that can hold no more than one little drop, that's called a khaliqa. Or when somebody starts digging a well and they've just taken the first stab at it, and that little hole that they've made, you know, maybe even with the hand, there's this much, and it can only hold that much water. That's actually called a khaliqa also. Well, khaliqa ay fiha atharul matar. Or you know, in the desert when it rains, or in the sand when it rains, you know how a drop makes a little bit of an indent? Like each drop has like a little imprint. That imprint is enough to only contain one drop. That imprint is actually called a khaliqa also. Well, khalawlaq as-sahab ba'da tafarruqin. And khalawlaq is the word used for clouds when they break up into tiny, 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 tiny pieces. The idea, the theme so far is things that are very, very small can only contain very little. Right? Like a tiny bit of a cloud can only contain so much rain. That tiny little crevice, that little nook can only hold so much water. You know? وَالْخَلَائِقْ حَمَائِرُ الْمَاءِ. Interestingly, khala'iq was used when people would take rocks and make, because they didn't know how to make a well, so they would take 4 big rocks and put them against each other so that water would get contained inside. So it's like a very primitive way of trying to store water. Those are called khala'iq. The idea is that when you have a small, basically a small kind of construction, a small kind of place or a small reservation, a place that's reserved, that has a very precise amount that it can hold. And it can only hold that appropriate measure, anymore it can't contain. And because of khala'iq, it can also mean a place that's dedicated for some portion, that's going to be there no matter what. It's going to land there and there's going to be water standing there. It's meant to be there. The idea of khalq, actually, is it highlights, when Allah is khaliq, Allah is highlighting that every ingredient or component that was used to make you was an exact measure, an exact pieces of the puzzle to make whatever it is that He made. They're all made of, down to the last drop, down to the last crevice, is an exact piece, all the nuts and bolts that were necessary for any creation. From it you get the word khalaq. And the idea of khalaq is 2 things. One, the smallest bit of creation that can be held, smallest thing in existence. It can also mean that which is reserved for you. That's an important meaning. What is reserved for you? Because the khalaiq were places where water is to be reserved. This was important. Allah is saying they will have no portion that is reserved for them. They will have not even the smallest portion for themselves. Not at all. Why? Because people of the book believed, get this, even if we're messed up, at the end of the day we're still believers, right? So we're going to get something. After all, we said La ilaha illallah. We do believe in the book. So we're going to get something out of this. Okay, fine, Allah's going to put us in hell, but for how long? At the end of the day, we're still Muslims. So we are going to come out. We are going to be okay. There's some reserved portion for us. We've all heard this before. And Allah is saying, this group of people, this one in particular, La khalaqa lahum fil akhirah. There is no possibility of any reserved portion for them whatsoever. La an-nafiya lil jins, which means there's no room for exception unless stated. No room whatsoever. They will get nothing, absolutely nothing in the afterlife. And this is the kind of thing khalaq is also highlighting here, that all they wanted to get, they were interested in getting where? Over here. So why would you expect anything in the akhirah? Everything you wanted, you got here already. Why such a harsh punishment? If anybody else cheats in business, something else. But when a believer cheats, when a believer who knows revelation cheats, that's a much bigger crime. That's defiance. That's, I know it's wrong and I don't care. That's the guy who looks in the security camera and says, now I'm going to rob it. Because he doesn't care about the authority. He doesn't recognize it as the authority. After knowing the authority, you do this. After being handed a trust, you do this. Often we talk about how people that live in the United States or Australia or England or Canada or the West, somewhere in the West, Germany or whatever, they say, there's so much fitna here, there's so much corruption here, I just want to go back home. I give my children an Islamic environment. And I look at them, Acha, Islamic environment? Really? Where are you going? Somebody one time sat me down and said, you should move to this country, you can hear the adhan outside. There's masjids everywhere. All the food is halal. You're living in the land of the kuffar. There's crime happening every 2 minutes. There's this happening, there's that happening. And I'm like, all these statistics because we actually have statistics, first of all. And second of all, yes, there's adhan outside. We can go to any masjid. How many masjids are full? And the taxi driver that took me to the masjid, that guy works 20 hours a day and gets paid not even a tenth of what he should be getting paid, and gets no vacations. And if he gets sick, it's on him. And if some drunk guy gets in his car and throws up all over it, he's the one who gets his pay docked. This is Islamic? Because you hear the adhan and there's halal chicken outside? That's Islamic? I'd rather not teach that Islam. Because for you to think that the meat is halal, and you get to hear Allahu Akbar, you get to hear the sound Allahu Akbar, but Allah is not Akbar in any part of that society. Allah is not the ultimate authority in any fraction of that society, in the behavior of people and how they treat each other and how they do business and how they talk and how they behave and how they act, how they think of other people. There is no consciousness of God in anything. The only time they stand in one row is in prayer, and everywhere else it's a class society. You get to hear the adhan? Please. Please. The idea here is that those who represent the teachings, those who say we are a Muslim society, when they become corrupt, then where is the world supposed to find guidance? When people say, what does Revelation have to say? All of you know the statistics, I know the statistics. The most corrupt countries in the world, guess what religion majority? Muslim. Muslim. Why would someone say these people who follow this religion are a role model? We should be more like them. We have a right to be angry at them for not being Muslim? What? What? How about you be Muslim first, homie? How about where's your Islam? How do we show it in our practice? How do we show it in our speech? How do we show it in the way we conduct ourselves? Before we become an example to somebody else and talk about how they're kuffar. Please. This is a crime against Allah Azza wa Jal like no other. It's a serious, serious crime. We're supposed to be witnesses of Allah to all of humanity. And right now we are witness that we're the most corrupt. This is why Allah was so angry at the Israelites. So how are we thinking we're exception? And so they have no portion. Now let's go through these consequences again. The first one, they have no portion because you sought all of it here. You wanted everything here. You got nothing there then. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا. There are people who say, Ya Allah, give me in dunya. There are people whose Islam is only about getting stuff you want here. They don't ask for forgiveness. They don't ask for, becoming a more guided person, making better decisions. All they want is, Ya Allah, get me married, get me a car, give me a promotion, give me a house, give me this, give me that, give me that. They'll do all kinds of haram and then make du'as too. And somebody's going to Hajj, make dua for me. Yeah, that's not this religion. This religion is not placing requests to Allah while in open violation of Allah's commandments. That's not what this religion is. We've reduced religion to basically, spiritual Amazon.com, just make an order and expect delivery. Allah didn't even answer my dua. I keep asking, He didn't give it to me. Really? That's how that works. Who's the master and who's the slave again? You want to complain to your master? That's some humble slavery right there. Because it didn't come on your terms. It didn't come on my terms. So we're in a position to claim against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, the first, they get nothing in the akhirah. The second is la yukallimuhum Allah. Allah won't speak to them. These are the people Allah spoke to in this world. Quran is what? Allah speaking to us. That is Allah speaking to us. The Prophet ﷺ's character, his behavior is what? Is Allah speaking to us. Kana khuluquhu al-Quran. The way he carried himself is Quran itself. That's Allah's speech. The people that came before us, Allah spoke to them in Torah and Injil. When Allah was speaking to you all this time, you weren't listening. And now you're in front of Allah. Imagine the court scene. Judgment day arrives. You thought you're going to get everything because you're a Muslim. You have reserved seats, and all of a sudden you find out there are no reservations for you. Hey, wait, what do you mean there's no reservation? I want to speak to Allah. Can I speak to Allah? When you don't get what you want, you go to court and you say, I want to talk to the judge. Can I give my case to the judge? And the security guard says to you what? The judge doesn't want to talk to you. You don't even get to see the judge. You don't even get to talk to the judge. وَلَا يُكَلِّمُهُمُ اللَّهُ. And imagine that the person who wants to go see the judge for a better verdict is being pushed away. And as they're being pushed away, they get a glance at the judge. Judge, over here, just give me 1 second, just give me 1 second. And what does Allah say? وَلَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهِمْ. He won't be looking at them. He won't look at them. That's the next part, isn't it? All this time, you knew Allah is watching you. And you wanted to forget that. You didn't want to think about it. When somebody told you Allah is watching, you didn't want to think about it. And now Judgment Day comes and you say, Ya Allah, just look over here, look over here. Please. The time for that is done. It's reversed now. وَلَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهِمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. There's another really interesting dimension of it. It highlights a sick psychology. Sometimes relationships become unhealthy. And there's many kinds of unhealthy relationships. One kind of unhealthy relationship is when two people that have a relationship with each other, one of them, all they do is agitate and hurt the other. That's all they do. And they find value. The fact that they got hurt or upset or angry means they care. That's how they feel cared for. See, he gets angry when we do that. That means he loves us too much. Because if he didn't care about us, no matter what we did, he wouldn't what? He wouldn't care. So actually in Jewish tradition, they even developed a narrative. Yes, God has been angry with us, it's true, but he's only angry because he loves us. You know, you have a married couple, they've been married for so long, they used to get angry at each other, but now it's the Cold War. So the two people that have two different lives living under the same roof, so no matter what he does or no matter what she does, the other one doesn't care. Whatever. Do whatever you want. When it gets to that point, there's no care left. If you cared, at least you still get what? Angry. So the idea in their head is if Allah will get angry, then he still cares. Right? So all this time Allah is being angry throughout history, it means he's really caring about these people. So if he cares so much, the anger is going to go, he loves us too much. Judgment day comes and Allah shows, forget anger, he won't even what? He won't even look. He won't even look at them. وَلَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهِمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. On the day of resurrection, he's not even looking at them. Not even giving them extra time. And then وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ, and he won't be purifying them. Now why is that important? You see, the idea is that if you're sinful and you end up in hellfire, then that punishment in hellfire will purify you of your sins until your sins are gone, they've been paid for, and then only your good deeds are left, and now you're in a position to come back and, you know, be placed in heaven, or come for retrial, at least, come out, because you've paid the price, you've been purified of your mistakes. Isn't that the idea of jail or any sort of consequence in this life? Somebody's a criminal, they don't get to be a part of normal society. When they pay their price by jail time, punishment, penalty, whatever it is, then they say, well, I've been cleansed of that crime, I've paid my price for it, so now I can join regular society again. You understand? The idea, لَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ, also doesn't just mean he won't purify them. Fine, he wouldn't see them now. But maybe after half an hour in hell, 20 seconds in hell, we'll be purified, we can come back. Allah says, no, I won't be purifying you. وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ, he won't purify them. The other assumption of zakka, the verb zakka in Arabic also means to consider someone pure. Not just to purify, but to consider someone pure. Like Quran says, وَلَا لَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't consider yourselves pure. Don't assume that you're pure. Zakka nafsahu, or zakka dunahu. He considers this person pure. No, you don't get to call each other pure. That's for Allah to know. Meaning, these people feel that they have been chosen by Allah, they're special, they're going to get special treatment on Judgment Day, and therefore Allah will just consider them pure people. Because everybody else is filthy, they're kafir, but we're the clean believers. We're special. Allah says, I won't be considering you pure. وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ. He won't be considering them pure. And now if that's the case, I mean, all the hopes of getting a retrial, all the hopes of getting reconsidered are closed. And the other, you know, al-jazā'u min jinsil amal, the compensation, the punishment fits the crime. Their crime is they were violating Allah's law. They were openly and proudly and knowingly putting filth on themselves over and over again. Then if you don't want to be clean, then Allah won't clean you. You see, those who try to clean themselves, they're not perfect. Those who try to live a clean life, those who try to stay away from sin, doesn't mean they can, but they fall and they get up and they ask Allah's forgiveness and they keep going. They keep trying. Those are the people Allah purifies. They couldn't purify themselves completely, but they were at least trying, and so Allah will complete their purification. He will purify them. He will remove the rijs from them. He will remove the sins from them. He will cleanse them on Judgment Day. But the people who didn't care, who knowingly were engaged in this kind of corruption, why would he? You don't deserve, you didn't want it. You weren't even trying. So why should he be the one to cleanse you? And so that concludes with وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, and they have painful punishment. Alim in Arabic is different from mu'lim. Mu'lim means something that hurts. Adhabun mu'lim means punishment that hurts. Adhabun alim. Alim is ism sifa. Ism sifa suggests something that is constant. Now if you know something about pain, like if you get hit with a needle, is the pain the same throughout? The first second, extremely hard, and it starts getting easier. Or when your foot runs into the leg of a chair, for about 30 seconds, your personality changes. And then after that, you start coming back to humanity and civilization, because it starts wearing off. I'm okay. But when you say adhabun alim, that actually means constant pain that doesn't wear off. There is no tapering off. And you know, in the human body, the way Allah made the human body, it is actually able to develop resistance to pain. boxers and people that work with fire, for example, women that spend a lot of time, for example, in the kitchen. I'm starting to spend more time in the kitchen. When you burn yourself the first couple of times, what happens to the tips of your fingers? They develop a kind of numbness. You can handle hotter than other people. Our Desi people are addicted to chai. Chai can be, somebody else has a sip, and you guys, no problem. You've developed a resistance. Allah Azza wa Jal, by describing the word Alim, is describing there is no resistance. It's constantly painful. There is no getting used to it. There is no managing the pain. They're going to receive constant, continuous, non-stop pain. And that pain is, on the one hand, physical, but on the other, as you have seen now, it's also emotional pain. The assumption that you're saved, the assumption that you're noble and dignified, the assumption that nobody will catch you. And all of those hopes coming and crashing in front of you and me because of the way we carry ourselves. That's the scary thing about these ayat. Nazalat fihim, it's talking about them. Ibratan lana, they're scary lessons for ourselves. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us of those who do their best to fulfill their promise to Allah. And may Allah Azza wa Jal make us of those who don't sell our own oaths, our own credibility, our own a word for a small gain or to harm somebody else. May Allah not include us among those people. I would like to encourage those of you that are following us online. We're updating these lectures. I know this is out of order, but we're updating these lectures on Bayyinah TV from the beginning of Surah Al-Imran, and there are other surahs that we've covered in depth. So I'd encourage you to start that journey, inshallah ta'ala. My theory is a little bit of Quran every day. Just maybe listen to 10-15 minutes in the car. Just get something going with your study of the Quran. You don't have to have notes in front of you. If you're a man, you don't take notes anyway, that's okay. But just the idea that the entire purpose of me creating Bayyinah TV was people should have an ability, no matter what their lifestyle, to have some engagement with the Quran on a regular basis, systematically. There's one thing, you can go on YouTube and you can just find whatever randomly. But somebody says, I want to just journey through the entire Quran. What process can I follow? That's actually the intention behind Bayyinah TV. So I pray that you benefit, inshallah ta'ala, and share the benefit with others. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Hayakumullah.
When you say
you can keep running.
When you say to understand the Quran, there are so many translations in the Quran, but they don't go as much as the depth of each word that we should understand, because the person who is translating either is not a philosopher, he doesn't go psychology or sociology. So how would he understand the depth of that word? That we should
Look, it's a really good question. Translations don't go in depth. So what are you supposed to do? Well, it's easy. Well, in my study, I've come to learn the best way to study Quran is with someone who's actually spent time studying it. Like reading, a basic familiarity is with translation. And quite honestly, no matter what translation I tell you you can read, you're going to develop a lot of questions. That's just going to happen. You're just going to say, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? This doesn't make sense. How come this is being repeated? Why is this not in historical order? Why is this breaking the chronology? Why did the subject change? You're going to have all kinds of questions. Or what does this ayah mean? Why are these people being punished? What does that mean for me? You're going to get these questions. Now the thing is, the tradition of Islam and the way Allah created this system is that we're supposed to come together, and those that have been spending time contemplating, studying, trying to understand the word of Allah will help those that are getting started in their journey and saying, here's what this means. Here's what this might mean. Here's what might help you understand. Nobody knows perfectly what the word of Allah means. Nobody can have ubur or hukm over the word of Allah. Ya'lu wa la yu'la alayhi. It's high, you cannot overcome the word of Allah. All I can offer you is, as a student of Allah's book, this is what I understand so far. That's as far as I can go. It's as far as our ulama went. That's as far as even the Sahaba went. Because it's the word of Allah. That's the most you can do. So it's supposed to be a collaborative thing. The translation you can use, not to understand the Quran in my opinion, translation you can use to collect your questions. That's actually the purpose of reading translation, is to collect your questions. Ayatun lisa'ilin, ayat for those who ask questions. And sometimes you'll find, if you come to me and say, how come it's translated this way? I might tell you it's actually not a translation I agree with, and here's why. Or it's not exactly the wording, or I wouldn't agree with this choice of words. Translators have a difficult job. They have one sentence to communicate Allah's words. That's a really hard job, because Allah's words are really loaded. And there's no way that I can communicate something in a sentence that's as loaded and as rich as Allah's own words. There's no way I can do that. right? So so they might be able to catch one drop of it. And then you have to understand, no translator is claiming that they got the whole meaning or they got all the lessons. They're just claiming, here's a drop of the meaning. And you have to come to the Quran with that attitude and know that's why there's a world of a difference between translation and Quran itself. There's always going to be. There's always going to be. And if you just say, I've read the Quran in translation, no, you haven't. You've read a translation. But and you've read droplets of the Quran's meaning, possibly. So we have to develop a kind of humility towards the word of Allah. And that's really my intention for creating Bayyinah TV was, first of all, I don't think people read that much anymore. And if you do, you're probably reading while you're driving, so you shouldn't be. Because that's the only time you have time, And so I wanted to create something people can listen to, people can watch, even passively, so they can go through it. The other thing is reading requires focus, attention. Sometimes vocabulary is difficult for some people. I know for myself, when I read stuff, I forget quickly. But if I listen to stuff, I remember for a long time. So listening actually helps with retention. So my intention was to create an audio-visual sort of library of the study. Those who want to listen can listen. Those who want to watch can watch. So that some of these lessons start sticking. And you literally find yourself, hey, I remember this was in Baqarah. Allah says something about this. I heard about it. That's a beautiful thing, even if you don't know the Arabic and you don't know what to quote. But it's something in your head that Allah said in this surah, something about this situation. That means revelation is coming to life in your life. It's not just a text anymore. It's not just information anymore. It's actually living. It's this living light inside of you that illuminates when the time comes. That's really why a daily dose of some Quran for yourself is so important. The Sahaba used to recite the Quran. They used to recite it every day. People recommend recitation of Quran every day. I argue that the recitation of the Quran was actually so highly recommended for a people who understood its language. Because when they recited, they were naturally getting counsel from Allah because of the no language barrier. You and I should be reciting the Quran every day, but we cannot. There's no comparison between the original recommendation of recitation and what we're doing. Because for the vast majority of us, myself in the beginning included, we don't know what we're reciting. So along with that ritual recitation, which is blessed in and of itself and brings a lot of good in your life, you have to learn to ask questions about Allah's words. That is your relationship with Allah personally. That is your personal rope with Allah. Like nobody will build a connection between you and Allah. Only you and Allah's words. That has to be the case. That's your personal connection. All I'm trying to do is help you build that personal connection, but I can't make that connection for you. You have to make that connection yourself. May Allah Azza wa Jal help all of us make that connection, and may Allah Azza wa Jal, bless those and protect those and accept those that are trying to facilitate that connection for others. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, yeah.
5 or 6 volumes.
Yeah, Tafseer ibn Kathir is very good in English. You can cut it now. Buy internet.